Thank you very much for joining me today. I have M.E. Ellington, or Martyn Ellington, and Stephen Stiefel, who are the co-authors of Tomorrow's Flight, now available on Kindle and paperback. First off, gentlemen, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
And congratulations, today you hit bestseller status.
We did. We're very excited.
That's fantastic. Well, I'm very much excited for the future of Tomorrow's Flight, but I thought I would start with a question about the past. So Martyn, as the one who is sort of the originator of the idea, can you tell us about the genesis of Tomorrow's Flight?
Yeah, so the genesis of Tomorrow's Flight is that I wrote a book called Yesterday's Flight about 10 or 11 years ago and self-published it. And it was the first book that I'd written or attempted to write, and it was self-published and it became an Amazon bestseller. And with it, I managed to land a literary agent in New York. And I had another novel which needed an editor, and she introduced me to Steve, and Steve worked as an editor on what became the Martialis incident. And because of the work that he did and the rewrite that I did because of that, I managed to get a publishing deal with it. And I was so happy with that. And Steve and I worked together quite well on that I then asked the agent to send him Yesterday's Flight to see, what he could work on. Because I always felt that the structure was there, the bones of it were there, but it just could be more. There was more story to tell. There was more to do with it. It could just be better than it was. And Steve came back and proposed that rather than working as an editor and writer relationship, that what we actually did was completely rewrote the book together. And really that's where that journey began, I guess.
And I love that. I love that it didn't start out with the intention of being co-authors, but how did you two work as collaborators on the book? Maybe Stephen, you could take this one and tell us a little bit about the process and how you really made that work for you.
We had, because we'd worked together as editor and writer, it was a pretty seamless transition. So I think probably, if I remember the details, I would have probably written Martyn probably a 15-page single-spaced email, a Word document, going through the novel and saying what I thought should be done and seeing if he was on board with that plan. And then when Martyn was, we began to break the story down, kind of tear apart I printed out his previous version and began to figure out where chapter breaks would fall. And it's a story that takes place in two different time periods, and figuring out that some of the movement between time periods could be set apart more. Sometimes the breaks between times were kind of short in the previous, and I thought each one of these needs to have its own chapter. And so we worked through it structurally until we were sort of happy. And, we added a couple characters and we changed the ending significantly, but not completely. Many of the things that happened before still happen, but just to answer some questions that I had that I'd sent to Martyn, we talked through plot points that way. So we communicated a lot before we actually got to the writing.
And then for the actual writing, how did you two handle that? Did you, work on the same chapters at the same time? Did you take turns? How did you make that work?
Well, I suppose essentially what happened is that once we'd sort of figured everything out that Steve just said, Steve would write a couple of chapters and send them to me. Because we're 6,000 miles apart. Just for those who don't know, I'm in North Yorkshire in England and Steve's in Los Angeles. So by the miracles of modern technology, he would email it to me. I would wake up in the morning to, a block of writing. I would then go through it and read it, go back to Steve with what, bits and pieces and this kind of thing. And really that's basically how the book formed, and that's how it came about. And then we would meet up and discuss the future plot points and where it's going and what's going to happen and this kind of thing, really.
And I would often toss Martyn some questions of things that I probably could have looked up myself, but chose not to, just out of certain laziness. Like airplane technology is not my area of specialty. And so I was sending Martyn questions, it's like, how big would the cargo hold be? And, where are the black boxes? And, just interesting things. Didn't we find out that they're orange? I think that was one of a black box is not black.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting because I have a cousin, luckily I have a cousin who has been an aeroplane fanatic his whole life. I mean, he's flown all over the world, and I include North Korea and places and things, and he'll go and sit in airports for hours. So I would go to him, so Steve would send me questions, and I would go to Ian and say, how does a plane stop? And how long can it run once the engines have shut down? What's the internal power systems, and how much water can these things carry? And we very quickly realized that there wasn't really a commercial aircraft that we could put in the book that was realistic enough, because the thing with this is it's a red-eye flight, but there's only very few passengers on it, because what do we do with 200 passengers in a book? And we didn't want to crash the plane and wipe most of them out, because the plane itself is almost a central character. The plane had to survive the crash landing so that they had a refuge, they had a place to live. It was a place of center for people, and then a certain group fractures and leaves, and they leave the safe haven kind of thing. So what we eventually ended up doing was creating an aircraft that was also a commercial aircraft as much as it was a cargo aircraft. And we sort of designed this aircraft from the ground up, really. And hopefully, and I don't think anybody's picked up on it yet, is that we designed it so carefully and we put in so much relevant technology that it's believable actually as a real aircraft, which we think is great. We think that's probably the best trick we've pulled, actually.
I think everything in the plane exists in another plane. It's just that not everything exists in one.
Yeah.
So we built we sort of ordered our own airplane. We customized it.
We might go to Boeing and pitch it to them and see what happens.
Yeah, except for the going back in time part. They might not go for that.
We don't want to do that. Yeah, that's a bad business model.
Yeah.
Let's not really get eaten by dinosaurs. And speaking of the dinosaurs, how did you source that information? Because there's still a lot we don't know.
Well, we really don't know a great deal, because how could we? I mean, we're going off fossils and surmising things and basing it on current creatures and things like that. So we just did the most up-to-date and relevant information that we could base it on, basically. So the T-Rex isn't the pop culture T-Rex. It's not the Jurassic Park T-Rex. It's a T-Rex, as they now believe, that was feathered to a certain degree and was as much of a scavenger as it was a hunter and things like that. And probably the biggest difference with this book compared to, well, there's a lot of differences, but one of the biggest differences is that for instance, with Jurassic Park, we've brought dinosaurs into our time and we've genetically modified them. So we can have velociraptors and T-Rexes living together and things like that. But in this book, we were going into their time, so it had to be accurate. But we didn't want it to be scientific, so we don't call the dinosaurs by the scientific names, because no one on the flight is a scientist. They're not paleontologists. So they're called chicken lizards and things like that. But we did do, both Steve and I did do quite extensive research to make it as accurate as it currently is at the moment.
And some of it's based on, going to natural history museums and seeing creatures of that time period, and not maybe specifically using that creature, but creating something similar to it. We felt we needed to sort of fill in the food chain. So we have bugs, and we have small scavengers, and we have large predators and large herbivores.
I love the amount of detail that you found in your research, but I think that you put just as much detail into the book itself, because I happen to know that this is not a self-published book. Rather, you've created a self-publishing house. So I don't know, Martyn, if you'd like to talk about what is a self-publishing house and how does it differ from self-publishing?
Well, in 2018, when we completed the very first draft of this book, because this novel's been 4.5 years or something like that. So in 2018, we had the rough first draft and we submitted it to a competition in Los Angeles called Book Pipeline. And we were a finalist out of over 2,000 entrants, which was fantastic for us. So, you know, we suddenly felt quite confident about it, and yet we couldn't really land a publishing deal that was acceptable to us. We couldn't get one that we felt, you know, was worth taking. And last year we started between as a production company called Messflix, and we decided that what we would do is extend that business into being a publisher as well, so into Mess Publishing, and we would publish our own book through our own publisher, and we would just do it all ourselves. But this isn't a self-published book. A self-published book is one where, you know, the writer does everything and then uploads it to Amazon and off it goes into the world. What we did with this book, and Stephen will talk more in detail because he kind of handled the heavy lifting on this side of it, is that we brought in an outside designer, and she really set the book up professionally and did everything that a full-blown publisher did, because we wanted it to be, you know, it has a publishing imprint, and we wanted it to be a published book, or as close to a published book as is possible. But as I said, Steve sort of did the work on that.
Yeah, so we hired an artist and gave the galleys then to a bunch of friends who read it looking for the small errors, you know, not content stuff, because we'd gone through that enough. We waited till we were happy with the content before we went to layout, you know, because that makes your artist nuts if you start changing things around at that point. So I assured Kimberly Ritchie, our designer, that we wouldn't be doing that to her, but we would be correcting errors. And so we went through that just in the traditional way. When you work with a publishing house, you go through galleys and return them. And so she would implement all of our changes, and that's how we came up with our final version.
Which is beautiful.
And for the cover, I sort of put together a rough idea of the cover, and then Kimberly came up with the amazing, fantastic cover that we've got now. Yeah, and Steve really, as I said, he really went to town on the interior of the book. So again, it was a joint effort, and Kimberly brought it all together, and she did a fantastic job on it. I mean, the book is beautiful.
It is. I have my own copy, and I can attest it's a beautiful, beautiful book. But I do have a question about it. You're mentioning the imprint and the publishing house. It's called Mess. Why is it called Mess Publishing?
Well, it's our initials. It's Martyn Ellington and Stephen Stiefel, and I think even Steve came up with it as a joke actually a few years ago.
Yeah,
and it just fitted because, quite frankly, it just suits how we work so well, and it stuck. And we just thought, well, why not? It seems to suit us, and it works. So that's what we went with.
I love it.
Yeah, imagine that title wasn't taken.
Yeah.
But I love it, and I love seeing Tomorrow's Flight in its current state as this beautiful novel. Again, you can get it on both Kindle and in paperback, and it's exquisite. It's completely professionally done, but it could go beyond this iteration. So I actually have a question for you, Stephen. Do you feel like Tomorrow's Flight is easily adaptable to other forms of entertainment?
You know, we do think that, and that is part of what Book Pipeline was looking for when they championed us all those years ago. They're looking for book projects that they think are adaptable as either film or TV. And Martyn and I are pretty convinced that this would be a good limited TV series, so much so that we've written the pilot episode, and we've had actors do a table read of that. And we continue to work with Book Pipeline, and we're hoping to start pushing that part of this project forward. It'd be probably 10 episodes.
Well, I can't wait to see it. I can't wait to see what happens next with Tomorrow's Flight and how it takes flight, if you will pardon the pun. Well, gentlemen, thank you again so much for your time. Tomorrow's Flight is available on Kindle and paperback, and it is now an Amazon bestseller, so be sure to check it out. Gentlemen, have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.